The first item on new business, the presentation by U.S. Wind regarding the release by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management of the construction and operation plan for the new level of review and public comment from the Bureau of Ocean Management makes a final decision on the construction and operation plan and what it means for Bethany Beach.
I just wanted, before I introduce Mr. Dunmeyer, I just wanted to point out a couple of things by way of background. And as you know, there are two lease areas off our coast between Maryland and Delaware. The one that's furthest away, that's off the Maryland coast, off Fenwick Island and Ocean City, is the U.S. Wind area, lease area. But they, although they are down there, their turbines will be visible to a certain extent from Bethany Beach. The one that will be off our coast, 19 miles off, is Ørsted. And U.S. Wind is further along in their construction and operating plan and in their getting their final approval than Ørsted is. Ørsted has not submitted their construction and operating plan. They expect to do so by the end of the year. And as you can see in the case of U.S. Wind, they submitted their plan to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in 2020, and it was just released for the next step of public review by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management last month. So it's a rather long process. This next phase in the process for U.S. Wind will probably take about 18 months as well. But I invited Mr. Dunmeyer here today because I felt that it would be good for us, Bethany Beach people, to understand what the U.S. Wind turbines will look like from our coast, and also to get a better understanding of the process that will be followed and what we can expect from Ørsted when they're ready to present. I've been in contact with Brady Walker from Ørsted. He knows that Mr. Dunmeyer is here today, and he knows that they will be given the same chance to come and explain to us once they are in a position to do so. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dunmeyer. And I had your thing here, just somewhere here. What did I do with it? Well, I apologize. Oh, here he is, I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Dunmeyer lives in Lewis, and he serves as the Delaware Development Manager for U.S. Wind. Mike is an ocean environmentalist with an extensive business background. After a long career as a senior executive for a Fortune 500 company, he served as executive director for Ocean Champions, a bipartisan political organization focused solely on ocean health. Mike was elected and served as a commissioner in the town of Dewey Beach, where he partnered with the Center for the Inland Bays to address Dewey's bayside flooding problems. Mike has an MBA from Duke University and a BA in economics from Washington and Lee University. He has served on the boards of directors for Ocean Champions, the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and the Center for the Inland Bays. So, Mike, would you please?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I really appreciate it. So as Mayor Hardiman mentioned, I live in Lewis, but I also do have a home in Dewey, so just like everybody here and listening online, the coast and the beaches here mean an awful lot to me. I love them, and I care very much about preserving them. Let's see. Will, what should I be aiming at? There we go. Your magic walk cured it, intimidated the clicker into working. So as Mayor Hardiman mentioned, there are two developers and two lease areas in the area. Ours, if you look at this photo, we're the southern area. We come as far as the Fenwick Island latitudes and then trend southeasterly along the Maryland coast. Ørsted, which is their project is referred to as Skipjack. You've probably seen that in the paper. They're just north. They essentially run from Rehoboth down through Bethany, and you can see that they tail away as they head south. Our lease area is about 80,000 acres. It's roughly 12 to 27 statute miles from the Maryland coast. And having a lease area, having the rights to a lease area is a good thing, but no one builds these projects on spec. So to proceed, you need to wait until someone tells you that they would like to buy the energy, that you would generate if you would go through the trouble of doing so. And that happened for us first in 2017 when the Maryland Public Service Commission, through a competitive bidding process, awarded us the ability to develop 270 megawatts of offshore wind energy. And then again at the end of last year where we won an award for 808 megawatts. An offshore renewable energy credit, or an OREC, is what you're bidding for. And what that essentially does is it sets the future price of energy that Maryland will be buying. So it's really, many things are considered, but lowest price kind of wins, and that's part of how this energy is starting to come down significantly in price. As I mentioned, let's see if we can do this again. Went the wrong way. Okay. So we have the ability to develop about 1,100 megawatts of clean offshore wind energy. That's enough to power 340,000 area homes, and we can do this with 76 turbines and 3 offshore substations, and if nothing else changes, the layout that you see there on the screen is what we would use. In that layout, the closest turbine to Fenwick Island is about 15 miles away. Closest to Bethany is 17. Dewey is 24. Rehoboth is 26.2, an actual official marathon. And if you would like to see what this looks like, actually I will show you at the end of this presentation a 24-hour time-lapse video that's also available on our website and our YouTube channel that shows you what this layout would look like from 84th Street in Ocean City, which is also 15 miles from its closest turbine and roughly in the middle of the lease area. You'll also notice on this schematic, there's a large open area in the front of our lease area where there are no dots representing turbines. That's our excess capacity. And we have about 700 megawatts worth of excess capacity, about 35 more turbine positions or so. We don't have any awards enabling us to build in that area now. But if another opportunity came up to compete for awards, say if Delaware started a procurement process or another state nearby, we would compete for that. So there is the possibility that that would be filled up. This is a Maryland incented project through the Maryland PSC. Maryland ratepayers will be paying for the energy. Why does Delaware matter? Well, they matter for a lot of reasons, but one of those is that we are hoping to make landfall and connect to the grid here in Sussex County. The reason for this is that as you head south from Wilmington, the grid gets older and weaker as you continue down the peninsula. And as you cross that Maryland-Delaware state line, there are no substations within the area that are greater than 138 kilovolts of voltage capacity, and that's not enough capacity for us to be able to connect the amount of energy we'll be bringing on shore. As it turns out, Sussex County has 3 230 kilovolt substations, one that is a Delmarva Power and Light substation adjacent to the Indian River Power Plant, one at Cool Spring, and one in Milford. We did look at do the analysis to see if it would be feasible to connect in Maryland. We did what's called an injection analysis and found that there's just significant congestion and a number of what are called grid violations, where the age of the components or configurations would just cause it to fail for various reasons. So we and some government and academic organizations that have looked at this found that connecting in Sussex County, and in fact connecting at the Indian River substation, would be the optimal point. And I will give some more detail about this in a moment. But the key considerations to keep in mind as we talk about this is that the cables will be buried from where they originate at the offshore wind farm all the way to where they connect to an existing inland substation. So we'll use a trenching method to bury about 6 feet beneath the seabed until we get to around 1,000 feet from the coast. At that point, we'll switch to something called horizontal directional drilling. And what HDD does is it allows us to send the cables about 60 feet beneath the beach and dune without coming into contact, so we don't disturb those critical ecosystems. We're able to bury the cables very deep so that there's no risk of them having wave action cause them to come unburied. And again, we just make sure that we don't touch those critical habitat. We'll also use horizontal directional drilling for any time we would need to cross wetlands or sensitive areas like that. So again, we're protecting those areas. There will be no above-ground infrastructure until you get to that substation of connectivity. The only evidence that you'll have that something was going on when we're done is the occasional manhole cover to allow people to get down and do maintenance at certain key areas. Okay, so I'll take a break from the project for a moment and walk you guys through the process for developing offshore wind in the United States. What you see in front of you, that is the process that all offshore wind projects go through with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, also known as BOEM, which is a division within the U.S. Department of the Interior. So that black area at the far left represents, for our project, that was 2010 to 2014, where BOEM will identify a large area offshore that they believe could be good for offshore wind development. It's referred to as a call area, and it'll be far larger than what ultimately winds up coming out of the process. If they identify this area, they begin with an environmental analysis to determine if there are any areas within that call area that represent critical habitat for threatened or endangered species. They eliminate any of those areas. They then go through a conflict analysis for any stakeholder groups using that area, so like the military, shipping, commercial fishing, as well as just general public input. And our original lease area, I hesitate to do this. Our original lease area, if you look at that schematic down there, was more than twice the size of what it wound up. When it was a call area, it extended much further to the east. And as BOEM went through this process, they found that in the far eastern area, there was a very valuable commercial scallop fishery. So they eliminated that area. And then you can kind of see it as you look between Ørsted's and our lease areas. You can envision a channel, and that is actually an international shipping channel. You guys probably see the cargo ships heading in and out of the Delaware Bay that go through that area. So obviously you don't want to have wind turbines in what's essentially a major thoroughfare, so that area was eliminated. What remained is what you see there. That was referred to as a final sale notice area. It's put out for competitive bid. U.S. Wind won the rights to it, and at that point, it became a lease area. And once it's established as a lease area, it's fixed. It's not going to move. BOEM has not moved these in the past. They won't move them in the future. I think there's some misinformation going around about that, but I think it stems from confusion about how the entire process takes shape and how a large call area is winnowed down into what eventually becomes a lease area. Okay, so in 2014, we won the rights to this lease area. The first thing we did was establish our site assessment plan. This is our plan to go out and learn everything we need to know about this area in order to develop safely and responsibly. BOEM approved that plan in 2018, and then we immediately got to work in carrying out that plan, doing research on the area, consulting existing research, doing surveys, and beginning to build what's called our construction and operations plan, or our COP. That COP was submitted to BOEM, as Mayor Hardeman mentioned, initially in 2020. We have some back and forths where they say, could you describe more about this area? Could you build out this section? We have specific questions here. So a couple back and forths to where last June 8th, they deemed that COP to be sufficient and complete. Now, that does not mean that it's approved. It just means that it has all the information that BOEM believes they need to assess it and determine whether or not to approve it. And that's where we are right now. So when they made that determination, two things happened. The first thing is that the COP became a public document that's available on BOEM's website, boem.gov, and I would encourage all of you to go out there and take a look at it. It is immense. It covers in excruciating detail every aspect of the project, from design of the components, fabrication, transportation, installation, the operations and maintenance of the project, and ultimately the decommissioning, where we will take everything out of the water at the end of its useful life, 25, 30, 35 years down the line. It also identifies all of the risks that we will encounter through our activities and how we will either avoid or mitigate those risks through our actions that we will take. It also will show you all of the research that we've either conducted or consulted in developing these plans. So the other thing that happens is we begin this 2-year public process where those plans are assessed technically as well as against every federal environmental law that exists. So guys, this is clean air, clean water, the Coastal Zone Management Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, et cetera. And as we go through this process, there will be public hearings where you will have an opportunity to ask questions, to register your opinion, and make sure your voice is heard. You can do this through the hearings, or you can submit feedback in writing through the website. And these hearings will be noticed, through various papers and news outlets, as well as to the towns themselves. We had 3 hearings at the end of June, just to kind of get the ball rolling, but there will be plenty more. I don't know, did anyone attend any of those hearings? Okay, so there'll certainly be plenty more as we go through this. You'll have your opportunity to, again, make your voice heard. Now, if everything goes as planned and we pass all of those tests, BOEM could permit us to begin construction in 2024. If that were the case, then we expect the first 300 megawatts of energy to be online in 2025, the remainder in 2026. Okay. Here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So what I'd like to do with this slide is 2 things. One, describe for you guys just the concept of a project design envelope and what that means, and talk in more detail about the proposed plans for landfall and connection to the grid here in Sussex County. So a project design envelope. BOEM understands that the process for developing offshore wind is a long one. There's a lot of analysis, and technology can evolve over that time. In addition, we will continue to research, and ideas that may have seemed like the best ones at one point in time may shift as more information is learned. So they allow us to put out in some areas a range of options. And they will go and they will evaluate all of these options. But we are then constrained in terms of anything we might do in the future to whatever is in that COP, that project design envelope. So as you look at the COP, a couple things to understand. The first thing is that we are seeking to permit the entire lease area. If you recall, we only have 1,100 megawatts permitted, so that's 76 turbines, 3 offshore substations, a fairly large undeveloped area. The closest turbine to Bethany Beach would be 17 miles away. The COP will show all the data around what it would be if we built out the entire area. So that would be then 121 turbines, 4 offshore substations. The closest turbine to Fenwick Island would be 11 miles, and the closest turbine to Bethany would be just over 12. The other concept that's important to note here is that we've used in the COP as our design basis a turbine from GE, the Haliade X 14.7 megawatt turbine that we expect to be commercially available in 2024 when we would be able to begin construction. So that turbine is 817 feet from the mean water line. We've also allowed for the possibility of a hypothetical turbine that is only being discussed right now that is 18 megawatts and would be as big as 938 feet above the mean water line. So our range, if 2 years in the future there's a 1,200-foot turbine that's available, we couldn't use it. The biggest we could ever put out there is 938. What we expect to be commercially available is 817, but again, the upside is potential. We would have 4 offshore substations, and in this description, we have identified 2 proposed landing spots. One at 3 R's Beach, which you guys know is just south of Indian River Inlet. That would be our preferred. The alternative proposed is at Tower Road, just south of Dewey and Indian Beach. The preferred point of interconnection is the substation adjacent to the Indian River Power Plant, and the preferred cable corridor to reach it from 3 R's would be to go through the Indian River Bay. Now again, we would be tunneling and sending the cables underneath of the bay bottom. And the view is that this would be the least disruptive route of all the possibilities considered from an ecosystem perspective, as well as from just a human system perspective. If we did go through Indian River Bay, we would again use horizontal directional drilling. We would use that process to go from 1,000 feet offshore into the 3R's parking lot, where there would be a cable vault set up, 4 actually, because this is potentially 4 cables. And then we would use horizontal directional drilling to go from there about 40 feet under the Indian River Bay wetlands that are along the east coast of Indian River Bay. We would then use a trenching methodology to get about 6 to 10 feet underneath the bay bottom. And then when we approach the west coast of Indian River Bay, we would again use horizontal directional drilling to go underneath of the wetlands that are on that side of the bay as well. Any of this work is seasonally restricted. It could only take place outside of May 15th to September 15th, and probably a bit of a buffer beyond that. The construction itself would likely take 2 off seasons, and again, if we were permitted to do so, would be 2024 and 2025. The other alternative routes that are there, you can see from 3Rs, there are a few potential routes that would use rights-of-way along roadways. There's also, from the Tower Road landing point, 1 potential route through rights-of-way in the roadways that would go to the Indian River substation, 1 that would go to Cool Spring, and 1 that would go to Milford. But again, the preferred route here would be landfall at 3Rs, cable corridor under the Indian River Bay, connecting at the Indian River substation. Okay, so real quickly, what's in it for Delaware through all this additional work that's happening here? Well, first, by connecting to the grid in Sussex County, the energy that we generate will be available for use not just for Maryland, but also here in Delaware. And to make that happen, U.S. Wind is going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to strengthen the local grid. So at the end of the day, Sussex County will get the benefit of that energy. They'll get a significantly enhanced infrastructure, and they'll get all of the jobs that come with that important work. We're also going to use Delaware companies in our construction supply chain, and we are in discussions with some local entrepreneurs that are looking to develop some ventures that I think could be really good for the local economy, but that could thrive because offshore wind is nearby, that also represent, again, job training opportunities. In terms of local investment, U.S. Wind will be here for another 35, 40 years or more, and we do believe that if you're going to be a member of a community, you need to do things to help. So we have and will continue to look to support organizations that are doing important work in the community. And then this last issue, this is really why I took the opportunity with U.S. Wind. I have a home in Lewis. I have a home in Dewey. I've seen how coastal flooding affects our communities here. It's an issue that's been getting worse decade over decade. And it's not just from those storms we have, like at the beginning of the summer season. It also now happens driven by tidal surges as well, nuisance flooding, sunny day flooding. And a lot of what is happening there is largely driven by sea level rise. That's an issue that's already affecting us today and can continue to get worse. If you look at the models that project this sort of information, they project for our area 12 to 18 inches of additional sea level rise by 2055. That'll create a lot of problems to manage in our area in and of itself, but if it gets to 24 inches, which is what it might do in the second half of the century if steps aren't taken, we would lose 8% of our land. So that would be a huge challenge for coastal towns as well as inland on the inland bays. It would also compromise drinking water, septic systems, farmland in Milford. It's a problem that must be addressed. And one of the best things that we can do to address this long term is transition to renewable energies. And the resource we have available to us here is strong, consistent offshore wind. Don't get me wrong, we need all of the rooftop and community solar that we can get, but to create a solar field that would replicate the amount of energy we can bring across, you would need an area the size of Wilmington. So it's not really feasible for Delaware. Likewise, onshore wind, you need mountaintops and large open plains where the wind can blow without any interruption for long periods of time, long stretches of land. We don't have that either. What we do have is strong, consistent offshore wind. And as a part of this, we also need areas in the western deserts to set up utility scale solar. We need plain states to do more onshore wind. We need the Far East and Europe to do their part. And the good news is I really pay attention to this field now, is these things are happening. What we can do here, the decision we can make, is to pursue offshore wind. And from my perspective, as we think about what kind of Delmarva Peninsula we want to leave to our children and grandchildren, I believe that offshore wind needs to be a part of that solution. What I'd like to do now, if time permitting, is there are two sets of simulations I'd like to show you. The first is from our YouTube channel. That's our 24-hour time-lapse video taken from 84th Street in Ocean City. And Will, if you want to go ahead and cue that up. Mayor, is it okay to? Okay. This shows you the 76 turbine layout and the 817-foot turbines. After this, I'll show you some static simulations from Bethany Beach that would show you the full 121 turbine build-out at 938 feet. So you have both perspectives here. This takes about 4 minutes to run. This is giving you the time. It was July 22nd of last year, which was my daughter's 21st birthday, a very memorable day for me. And this is just some background on how it's done. We did build into the simulation a 14.6-foot elevation representing the mean elevation above sea level at 84th Street in Ocean City, and a 5-foot 1-inch line of sight correction for kind of an average height person where their eyes are looking out on the wind farm. So what you'll see is that as the sun comes up and is on the horizon and backlights the turbines, that's when they're most visible. And I would say if anyone wants to walk up and take a closer look, feel welcome to do so. This is also available on our YouTube channel and website. But unfortunately, this is not giving the clarity that you would typically see on your computer. So this is not an accurate representation of what the view shed would be. Again, I'll send our YouTube channel link to the mayor and have her ask if she could distribute it so that you guys will be able to go and look at that yourselves and see it more clearly on your own computers.
We can put it on the website,
Okay.
the link.
Mike, did you say the most visible time of the day for the turbines is the early morning? Just
Correct.
after dawn?
So when you see this on your screens, what you'll notice is that when it's backlit, when the sun is behind the turbines, that's when they're most prominent.
Okay.
They're still very tiny on the horizon, but you can see them. As the sun starts to come overhead and get from that 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock range, on a typical summer day with a lot of moisture in the air, they become very difficult to see. On a clearer day with low humidity, they'll still be more obvious, but in this video from July 22nd of last year, you'll see they practically disappear. Then as the sun starts to set and front lights them, they again become more visible. And I think it's, people will perceive it based upon how they view these things. I think that they're very small, and from my perspective, it doesn't bother me. Different people will see it different ways with certainty. The other point to make here, as it fades to darkness, I guess we're a little ways away from that, U.S. Wind is committed to using what's called aircraft detection lighting system technology. These are lights that only illuminate when a low-flying airplane is detected near the wind farm. And looking at the history of recorded flights through this area, it looks like that would mean that the lights would be on for several hours a year, i.e. very infrequently. The technology exists. The FAA has not approved it yet. If they do, that is certainly what we will be using. If they don't approve it, then we would use their standing lighting system, standard lighting system, which would be visible whenever it was on, which would be at night. We are very hopeful, though, that the FAA will have the ADLS technology approved by 2025 when we start putting those turbine towers on top of the monopile foundations. And I think we have a blurb here where you've got the lights. Again, with the clarity, it's probably not going to show up. Yeah, it's not going to. Yes, sir.
You indicated that something would be 12 miles away. Is that the excess capacity?
So you've got the perfect teaser for what I want to show you next, which is these are what are the COP visual sims, and they're on BOEM's website, so you can look at them there. They represent the full build-out of the wind farm, so 121 turbines at 938 feet, so the biggest possible turbine. In that situation, the closest turbine to Bethany becomes 12 miles away. And, Will, if you can go ahead and we've got one morning shot here, and then an afternoon shot from Bethany. And let me see.
Nothing there.
Can't see anything.
You can see
Yeah.
spots along Bethany. Your view shed here from Bethany, they'll be in this right-hand corner. But again, unfortunately, on this screen, it's not showing it as clear as it needs to be. So I would again encourage everyone to go out and take a look on the BOEM website. There are visual simulations there from Bethany, from Ocean City, and from Assateague. They have them from morning, afternoon, and then they have nighttime shots showing you what the lights would look like if they were illuminated. They have what's called the prevailing wind, which is out of the west, the southwest, which would cause if you think of me as a turbine face, it would cause the blades to be perpendicular to the beach and less visible. They also show the blades if they were parallel to the coast and looking right at you. They have a second set for all of these called Panorama with Detail, which puts a box around where the turbines are, and then they have Just Detail. What they've done in the Just Detail shot is they've blown up that section that was in the box like an inset on a map so that you can get a good look at what the turbines look like. But the panoramic views represent what the field of vision from a person standing on the beach would be. And again, please do go take a look at those. So those are all of my prepared remarks. Do we have time for some questions? Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
What is the effect on birds?
It's a great question. So as it turns out, we've got...
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, sure. So this gentleman asked what the effect on birds is. So migratory birds, the passerines that go up and down the coast, when they pass through Maryland and Delaware, they fly inside of 10 miles from the coast. So they will not be near our or BOEM's wind farm. And the Audubon Society has actually looked at all of the existing lease areas and said that they largely are outside of the migratory path of those birds. Now, we do have marine birds that spend either all of their lives or most of their lives offshore, and we've done a study every 2 years going back to 2014 where we do visual by airplane and by boat and computer counts of the species that are there. So we know by month counts of species type in the lease area, and what we see is that the densities there are far lower than, again, what you see to the east. And that's part of why BOEM selected this area, is it's kind of a relative desert of inactivity for the area. The current count we have, I think, shows on average at any point in time about 15 to 20 birds in that lease area. The other thing that we've seen is that the flight behavior of those birds, marine birds in general, tends to be low to the ocean. So for the most part, they tend to fly beneath where the path of the rotor and the blades would be. And the other piece of intel that we have is looking at the 30 years of experience with offshore wind in Europe. Because there are no visual obstructions like buildings, trees, hills that hinder a bird's ability to perceive what's coming, they can see these wind farms a long way away. And in general, what happens in Europe is they just seem to avoid them. So there is some risk. There certainly, we would be introducing more risk than exists today, but we think based upon where the birds migrate, where the birds situate, and flight behaviors, that we think it'll be quite negligible at the end of the day.
Can I just note that as an architect, I've probably killed more birds than these with windows. They tend to hit a lot of glass.
Yes, ma'am.
Are both the wind farms going to come offshore at the same place, the one north?
So I don't know what Ørsted's plans are. As Mayor Hardiman mentioned, They're a bit behind us in their schedule, probably about a year and a half behind where we are. At the end of the day, BOEM is going to have to permit our project. DENREC will have to permit our making landfall and whatever plans we would make if we were to go through the bay. DelDOT would have to approve it if we were going to use the right-of-way and the roadways. So not to get ahead of ourselves, all that would have to happen, but there are physical limits to how many cables can make landfall in one area. And based upon how Indian River Bay sets up, it gets very narrow in some points, and there are physical limits to how many cables you can get through those narrower areas of the bay. There are also electrical engineering limits to how much energy you can connect at one point. So it's unlikely that very much after us would be able to follow that same path. But again, we haven't been approved to do that either. So, yes, sir.
How are you going to handle your community involvement? Are you going to have a foundation? Do you have someone dedicated to the local area and all? You say you're going to be here for 30 years. Are you going to seek out opportunities to sponsor local events, or are you looking to have local communities have to come to you? I'm thinking particularly about like our 4th of July parade.
It's a great question. So right now, I am U.S. Wind's one Delaware employee. Once the wind farm is operating, we'll have operations and maintenance facilities out of Ocean City. If Delaware develops their own procurement program, there may be some coming out of the Delaware Bay, but that would be out of Ocean City. More employees will be here to pay attention to things as we gear up. But right now, it's been me. I'm outreach, and I'll put my contact information up, and I have cards with me. If anyone would like me to come just speak one-on-one to your neighborhood, to a group of friends, I'm happy to do so. And I am looking for opportunities. So far, we have made a contribution to the Center for the Inland Bays to help with to finish off really their capital contribution for their education facility at the James Farm Nature Preserve. We've made a contribution to the Delaware Prosperity Partnership, which is a jobs and company incubator for the state. We've made similar contributions to environmental organizations in Maryland, and certainly would look to do more of that. So if there are ideas, absolutely contact me. And things like town 4th of July parades, we probably should be doing, and that is my mistake.
Just a follow-up. Do you have any experience as to the ways and the level of community involvement in Europe where you have operations already?
We've got a lot of depth in the company from both U.S. power developers and because this industry is so much deeper in Europe, obviously from Europe as well. I've never asked them specifically about that. So this is just me thinking out loud. My perception is that the level of engagement and culturally how people approach things like this in Europe is very different to how it happens here. Just I think based upon personality types, generally how we've culturally evolved. I think we in the United States tend to be a lot more involved in these sorts of things. So I don't know that we've got a whole lot from there, but I'm certainly learning every day and doing my best to do that engagement. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest challenge that I have is that there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. And so my role, as I see it, is really to just get factual information in your hands that you can make your best decision from. And again, please do call on me if I can help in any way.
Mike, I got a couple. You made a comment that the structure could possibly handle 938-foot tall turbines, but you're only going to do 817 right now. Is that the plan?
Not quite. The plan has a project design envelope that allows for an 817-foot turbine that we expect to be commercially available to be used up to a 938-foot turbine. And the Maryland Public Service Commission award requires us to use the best available technology. Now, that doesn't mean the biggest. You know, best considers a lot of things.
Okay,
But based upon how we've written the plan, we would be able to choose between 817 feet and 938 feet.
Okay. You also,
The other thing I'd say is that whatever we did propose, BOEM has to approve.
Okay.
And
You
they
also-
take into account,
you mentioned that the landfall at 3Rs would have structures of some sort at 3Rs. Is it just going to be, are there going to be buildings there? Or is it just going to basically be a connection point and it's going to go under the ground? Do you have any idea what that's going to be?
I apologize for the confusion, there will be no structure there.
There'll be no structures? Okay,
Everything,
good.
yeah, so the entire connection process will not have any above-ground infrastructure until we get out to an existing substation that we're going to connect to. So no coastal infrastructure whatsoever, just a couple
Okay,
manhole
good.
covers when we're done.
All right. I have no idea what the lifespan of these structures is. What happens when their life is over? Are you responsible for taking them out?
Yep. We are. So they are built to last a minimum of 25 years. With proper maintenance, there's no reason they can't last 30, 35, or even more. But when all is said and done, we are required, per our lease with the federal government, to remove everything that we put down unless someone decides, you know, generally that, like, the scour protection, the rocks that are put around the foundations, people may decide that that's good habitat for black sea bass, and so we want to leave that
But
there.
the superstructure would be taken out.
Yeah, and whatever people agreed should be taken out, we would take out. So that would be the cables, that would be the monopile foundations, that would be the turbines. We have to, again, as part of having a federal lease, we have to take certain performance bonds, both for the cost of operations as well as the cost of decommissioning. Those bond amounts are upped as more goes in, and they're marked to market every 5 years to reflect changing cost structure to make sure that if at any time anything happened to U.S. Wind, the money to remove the entire infrastructure is there and nothing falls to taxpayers.
Okay, I understand this is mainly a Maryland-type project. You mentioned that the Delaware would actually get some of the power that's coming on shore. Are we going to get half of it, 10% of it, 20? You have any idea what the benefit it is to Delaware? It sounds like all the maintenance and all the support is going to be in Maryland, but yet we're suffering all the construction projects and everything in Delaware. So what's it for us? What do we get out of this?
So the way that energy is billed and the way it's actually consumed are two different things. So we're a part of a 14-state grid managed by PJM, and it has dozens and dozens of different energy inputs into this grid. PJM matches supply with demand and moves energy around, but it's contracts that we all have with our energy providers that kind of determine billing. The actual electrons themselves tend to be consumed close to where they connect, just how physics works. So the reality is that while Delawareans won't be paying for the energy, we'll be using clean energy as we power our homes because it's what is going to be close by. Right now, we get most of our energy from a corridor that roughly parallels Route 1, and most of that is imported from Pennsylvania. There's a congestion surcharge we all pay that's a part of those bills because that energy does get congested just like Route 1 traffic does. Bringing all this energy in from the east might relieve some of that. Like I said, the other thing that Delaware gets is the investment in infrastructure. Typically, when grids are strengthened over time, that cost is passed through to the ratepayer. In this case, U.S. Wind is going to be paying for all of that. And when Ørsted does their work, they will be paying for that. There will be jobs that come out of this, and certainly, it's quite possible the state may want to talk to us about benefits, and I've let all of the towns know individually and collectively through the ACT that we're certainly interested in talking to them to see if there are problems that you guys have that we can help address.
When you say the grids will be strengthened, what does that look like?
So now you're asking me to delve deep into my electrical engineer background.
Or just like, does that mean that the lines get buried, like, or does that have to do with transformers or because I have no electrical experience either, so just 50,000 foot level.
So first of all, additional substations will be built around the existing substation, directly adjacent to it. But as that energy propagates out around it, the entire line transmission system has to be able to support it. So all of those lines, so you may have, and again, not an electrical engineer, I just talk to lots of them all the time, but we may have 138 kilovolt lines running in some places that need to be upgraded to 230 kilovolts. I don't know if any of that could then also include the concept of burying those lines, but at the very least, it's strengthening that infrastructure. And right now, if you look at our grid and use kind of the road system as an analogy, we've got a mix of, 3-lane highways, 2-lane country roads, and horse paths. And everything ultimately needs to be in the area, kind of like a three-lane highway. So it all gets built up to where it can handle the amount of voltage that's being passed through it.
And you said you're going to help support that? That's
Yeah, U.S. Wind is responsible for paying for that necessary upgrade.
So you mentioned, the second half of the century and 24 inches of sea level rise and the Delaware that we're going to leave to our children and grandchildren. As a 40-year-old, I'm actually worried about the Delaware we're going to leave for me. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to say that I think, that there are a number of questions, and as you mentioned, there's going to be plenty of time for public feedback. But, in my personal opinion, climate change is the most pressing issue of our time. The time for oh, is this going to be kind of ugly on the seashore is past. I think personally we need real change, real solutions now, actually 20 years ago. And so I just want to say I commend the work that you guys are doing, and I appreciate the effort that it requires to get to where we are, especially in the U.S. As you mentioned, Europe's been doing this for 30 years. But for us in the United States to decarbonize our power grid is probably the most important thing that we can be doing right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question. Do they make any noise that anything we could hear?
They do make noise, but nothing that you will hear from the shore. And it's also worth noting that all the turbines will have Coast Guard required navigational lighting and marking and sound. None of that will be visible or audible beyond 5 nautical miles. So again, none of that would make its way to shore either. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
In the end, who makes the final decision?
So there are a number of different groups that have permitting authority. So the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is responsible for permitting the project writ large, whether we can proceed or not. If we are to proceed, DENREC would need to permit landfall and potentially permit work through the bay. And if we were to go through the bay, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would also have permitting authority there. Again, if we were to go through a land-based route, then DELDOT has permitting authority. So there are those 4 organizations.
Can I just add one more thing to what can I get back on my high horse here? Right now you're talking about the closest possible turbine being 12 miles from Bethany Beach or 11 miles from Fenwick Island. Well, if sea level rises 24 inches, it's going to be much further away. So it'll be very hard to see.
Let's hope that's not the case.
Anybody? I had a couple of questions, Mike. When do you make the decision about whether they'll be parallel to shore, the turbines, or perpendicular? Or is it individual ones?
Interesting. So it actually, like a weather vane, well, actually not entirely, but the turbine nacelles, which hold the generator to which the hub is attached, and the blades will turn to face wherever the wind is coming from, so that you've got
I gotcha.
optimal reception. The blades themselves can also be feathered for efficiency, and then if there were a storm, they're turned into the wind, so that again, you don't have as much resistance.
Okay, and the blades, that 817 and 938 is with the blades straight up?
Correct. 800, both measurements, 817 and 938, would both be with one of the blades facing
Okay.
straight up at its highest point.
And I understood you to say that even though Delaware was getting a lot of the benefits, that because of U.S. wind, we would not be paying additional rates based on that?
Because the Maryland Public Service Commission initiated the project, Maryland ratepayers are responsible for picking up that charge. Delaware is not.
Okay.
And just if you're curious, our second award for 808 megawatts is the requirement from the Maryland PSC is that the total impact to the average Maryland ratepayer cannot be more than 88 cents a month. So costs have come down considerably from what they were 10, 12 years ago because of the maturation of the industry, more efficient turbines and competition.
And you and I spoke one time about radar. Could you address that a little bit and what's being done on that?
Sure. So there are two types of radar. There's land-based radar that's used for things like military operations, FAA radar, things like that. And we go through a process with all of those organizations to make sure that the siting of the wind farm is not going to interfere with their activities. And again, that's a part of the permitting process. The bigger challenge, though, is marine vessel radar. So the radar that is used by commercial vessels or recreational vessels as they're moving around out in the ocean. And the challenge is that wind farms can cause propagation and additional refraction so that people will get false radar signals. The National Academies of Science did a in-depth profile of this. I read that, I took notes on it, I condensed my notes, I presented my notes to one of the guys who actually lives here that was one of the reviewers of this document to make sure that I understood. He said, yep, you got it. The key thing, though, is it's very nuanced. So the major cargo vessels that we see coming in and out of the Delaware Bay, the quality of radar that they have is not going to have any problems. They're also all highly trained to deal with the sorts of obfuscation that other issues will cause as well. They know how to read their radar, they know how to work with these things, and said, not going to be a problem. So the challenge will be with the commercial fishing and fishing communities because it's a lower grade of radar. The training is uneven, for understanding how to best deal with that. And it's something that the offshore wind industry is actually paying attention to. Next week, I will join a conference, an industry conference, to review this paper and look at things that could be done to address that. At the end of the day, it becomes an issue. The turbines, by the way, are about a mile apart. During the day, visibility should be fine for navigating there. It's in fog, at night, things like that. So you've got a smaller subset of people that are going to be out in those conditions. But again, that's something that we take very seriously and want to make sure that there's a solution in place for.
And could you address the recent call that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management put out for the areas that are going to extend from Delaware down to the Carolinas, but further off the coast? One of them is adjacent to the one that Ørsted has now. So we wouldn't see that as much as we see the ones here, but they have this is just how this is accelerating. The federal government is putting out more calls for areas that they're going to start studying, and one of them is about 4 million acres extending from Delaware down to the Carolinas and further off our coast.
That's correct. So there are right now about 20 approved, 20 lease areas with projects awarded in development, in some state of development between Massachusetts and North Carolina. Mayor Hardeman is referring to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management continuing to develop offshore wind, so they've started the process of identifying potential new areas to develop. These are all east of the existing areas, so further out at sea from where our and Ørsted's lease areas are, and they're beginning that call area process. So a very large set of areas, not all contiguous, but some very large blocks further east have been identified, and they're now going through the environmental analysis again to see if there are areas that should not be developed for critical species reasons or critical habitat. and they're going through that stakeholder analysis. They've already removed a good chunk of the areas that were initially identified, and they'll continue to for another year or so. But it's referred to as the Central Atlantic Planning Area. And so again, if you go to BOEM's website, boem.gov, look for that, then you'll be able to tap into any hearings and any process they may have concerning the areas near Delaware, because they'll have to engage with the public around those areas here as well. I think given where they are lining up, it's unlikely that you would be able to see them beyond Orsted's project and our project, but until everything is fully defined and we knew what technology was going to go out there, I couldn't say definitively.
And if people are interested in participating in the hearings or providing comments on the ones that are coming up, how do they find out about them? Do they have to go to the BOEM website and look for yours specifically?
So we will, when BOEM runs the hearings, so whenever they have a hearing, they will publish it in all the local newspapers. I think they did some radio. I will also push the information out to all the coastal towns so that you guys have it and can, put it on your website and alert
That would be good.
your residents as you see fit.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Mr. Dunmeyer, for coming. This has been very helpful and very interesting.
My pleasure. Thank
Thank
you all so
you.
much for your time, and do please contact me.